welcome back to the channel. My name is Jamie, and today I'll be telling you if the Athearn ready-to-run GE C44-9W is a good buy. Now that is a tongue twister if you don't mind me saying, and if it is worth in today's detailed and massive pre-owned market. Now we do have multiple choices in Dash 9 models such as Kado, Scale Trains, MTH, and even Athearn has come out with a newly tooled version in a Genesis 2.0 range. Not sure why it needs a 2, but hey. However, today is focused on a more budget-friendly end of the market, or towards someone who just wants to add more of the engines to a consist and already has something like a Scale Trains that they, and they just don't want the extra features on the trailing engines. Now, as usual, I'll be going through the history, the model itself, and the conclusions if you should get one or not. So keep tuned to find out if this model is right for you. Now, if you are interested in more content such as build, reviews and layout builds, do subscribe and like this video. At the moment I'm refinishing and adding DCC sound to a GS5. It's a brass one, so that's a bit of a different sort of thing. I've never done that before. And yeah, I think it'll just be a nice trip to make. However, unlike a lot of locomotives I've discussed on this channel, this is actually one of the few that I would say is probably the most modern out of all of them. It's one of the few that's actually still running around America, Brazil, Canada, even parts of Australia. This is also unique because it is the final run of the 4-stroke FDL engine in domestic locomotives. This is the GE-9 44CW. Now let's wind back the clock to the 90s. Chicago Northwestern, a Class 1 railroad, needed more power than the brand new 40-8C model by GE had provided, 4,000 horsepower. So they upgraded it to 4,125 horsepower. However, there was still a need for more power overall. And they approached GE to push for a successor, now known as the Dash 9 series. Now these improved on the power and overall features, and this also meant that there was a pre-production model as usual. This pre-production model, named the 844CW, was built. What this was basically a Dash 9 built into a Dash 8 body, and they were delivered to CSX. However, they were derated to 4,000 horsepower. Now, this really leads us into the main Dash 9 series. Now, it wasn't a huge revolution, but it was an evolution in some ways. It had two major improvements over the earlier Dash 8 models. It had the new GE high adhesion trucks, which are a massive improvement over the previous floating bolster trucks that were originally came out with the U-25s, the U-boats. And a newly controlled wheel slip. So something new that was also featured in the Dash 9 was computers. Previously, where there would be dials and gauges, it would be replaced by computer screens that gave. This was truly the beginning of GE's domination in the market. A feature that would become the norm that happened because the FRA was pressuring railroads to pick safety cabs meant that they would be now the standard option instead of their previous standard cab. This meant that the standard cab would be the more expensive option compared to in previous generations. Hence why, in Dash 9 generation of locomotives, the only railroad to ever order the standard cab version was Norfolk Southern, with 125. Despite the difference in naming scheme, the 9-40CW is identical to the 944CW. They look identical, and they basically are identical. Now, the reason for the drop in horsepower is due to software governing the engine and downrating it to 4,000 horsepower. This is because Norfolk Southern felt that extra power wasn't needed and would prefer saving fuel instead. However, these locomotives are definitely unique in the sense of the Dash 9 would also sell over 3,000 models to multiple railroads. Some of the notable Class 1s would be BNSF, Norfolk Southern, Canadian National, CNW, SP, and other smaller railroads. These currently serve all over, however, they are starting to get a bit old. These days, many Class 1 railroads are rebuilding their -9 models into AC locomotives, with many such as Norfolk Southern leading the charge, with hundreds of the -9s and more being rebuilt into the AC44-C6M. The -9 series will also have a relative known as the AC series, such as the AC4400s and AC6000s. However, over time, they would also be replaced by the Evolution series, nicknamed the GEVOs. However, it would be really hard to argue the impact that these locomotives have brought to both real life and model form. In Australia, they've sort of inspired such as the newer generation of C44s, hence the name, and the NR class locomotives in Australia. They're one of the major freight haulers where I live, so they're quite a unique sight. And honestly, hearing the FDL is just, especially the air compressor, like, whoop. I don't know how to describe it, but you know what I mean, right? There's always, I love the GE compressor whoop. Okay, so what I'm going to start discussing is the actual locomotive that we have on my desk. So what we have is the Athearn ready to run. So what I'm going to do is sort of explain what it is first. So with the Athearn ready to run series, basically, like other sort of main companies such as Walters, where Walters sort of upgraded their Proto 2000 series of locomotives to sort of like the newest sort of mainline series. Athearn, what they did was they had the blue box range. I'm sure you can still find them around in stores. And what's interesting is they've basically upgraded the detail, added things like DC sockets and directional lighting. Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because on the newer ready-to-run range, such as the ones that you see on Athearn.com, all of them are featured with 21-pin sockets instead of the 8-pin, and also feature LEDs instead of light bulbs. Now, I mention this because some of the ready-to-run range do not feature LEDs. My earlier SD45s, they don't actually have LEDs, so you do have to keep that into consideration when ordering one for yourself. Just make sure you double-check. But overall, they're going to be quite similar to the mainline series of Walters in terms of details. So let's get to the desk. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit of history there. I always love talking about history. I'm even planning to do a little bit of a history section. Just a whole video on the histories of the Pennsylvania Electric. So if you're interested in that, keep tuned. So, what we're going to start off with is a basic first impressions. How does the model look like when you first sort of have a look at it? And then we'll sort of go into more detail, then have a look at sort of specific areas such as trucks, side views, and the front. Generally speaking, I gotta say, as a, and I will call it a budget model because, this isn't the Genesis line, and it is basically a Athearn sort of beginner, sort of, intermediate line. So in terms of what it is, it's pretty good. I can't really fault it. And to be honest, I'd say, there's no glaring issues here. Mind you, this is pre-owned, so there are a little bit of damage that I have accidentally caused. One of the examples is a PTC antenna on the top, but I'm not going to mark down Athearn for that. That one's completely my fault. However, ignoring that, what we're going to do is start off with first impressions. Straight up, the yellow is pretty solid, and from a distance, there's no obvious sign of overspraying. Generally speaking, the colors are solid, gray is solid, and there's no sort of yellow bleed through on the gray. If you're curious to see how the yellow compares to something like a Proto 2000, there's my Proto 2000 Jeep 38. I'd say the UP yellow is a little bit more muted on the Walters Proto 2000 ones, but pretty comparable to something from the Athearn lineup, except Athearn's a little bit more orange. But generally speaking, they're all pretty comparable. Nothing super out of place. I would actually say in some ways getting that sort of variation is kind of nice, because in real life a lot of locomotives are painted at different times, so they sort of fade differently. So paint aside, how do the numbers look? And how is the general detail? Now, straight away, you're going to notice, right, there's plenty of warning labels, you know, don't stick your finger here, don't start train without people on board. But generally speaking, all of those little writings are going to be pretty much on par. So what I'm going to do is just so as you can see, the UPI railroad.com is actually pretty legible. Munch. Yeah, unfortunately, none of the actual little warning labels, you know, not legible. But then again, are you really putting a magnifying glass to a locomotive like that? Generally speaking, I gotta say, I can't fault them on the decal placement even. There's no obvious sort of missing details. I'd actually say it's pretty actually well detailed. So on the first impressions, even the pad printing is pretty much very good, except what you're going to notice is in areas where things like where you'll notice like there was a crease, for example. I'm going to just show you. Now, as much as I like to chalk that up to personal handling, I don't think that's the case. Just because, generally speaking, where you'll notice is that they're all placed over grooves. Now, I don't think that's personally a massive deal, but it is something to be aware of. And I'd personally, if I were you, I would definitely inspect it in person before buying one of these, or at least just asking the store to send you a picture of the exact one you're going to be buying, so that way you just, you know, guarantee that you don't have that issue. Personally, I knew about it, but I'm going to be fading this and weathering this a lot, so it's not going to be a big problem. I'd say just be aware of it, because it's not exactly pretty looking, considering they got everything else right. It's a bit bizarre, but what can you do? So what we're going to do is just have a quick look at that beautiful detail. And just look at that. That is pretty solid, if you ask me. So even it's got all the warning signs, and so yeah, that's pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is showcase the back. So as you can see, even the grab irons are pretty much, I would say that actually some of the thinner budget ones have actually, and to be honest, very comparable to the ones on my Athearn Genesis one. So I'm just going to quickly showcase. They are pretty much identical in thickness. And honestly, that is very impressive for, I basically just had a quick look at Lombard. It's $130, right? For a $130 model, brand new, that is insane. Yeah. For a, you know, for a budget model, that is very, very good, especially coming. Now, obviously there was an issue with the paintwork. I'm not really sure why I've been having issues with Athearn's paintwork recently. I don't know if I've just been getting, you know, because I've been buying pre-owned, you know, for some strange reason, all my Athearn ready to run kind of paintwork just seems to suck. I don't know. I feel like it could just be bad luck. But generally speaking, I'm just not sure what's going on. So as we have a look around, you can see how beautiful made those, as I mentioned, the high adhesion trucks. I did double check if they had just reused all the Dash 8 or something like that trucks, but no, I'm pretty sure these are perfectly molded variations of the real thing. At first I thought there would be casting and a little bit more detail, but I don't think there's any real detail missing. So if we have a look at the actual, now you're going to notice that the actual paintwork on the Union Pacific is a little bit better here. Now I think, look, personally, I think it's really cool to for it being weathered unintentionally. But yeah, it's not a great coal manufacturing, because it's really strange, because the numbers are perfect. They're on par with pretty much even Genesis. But I gotta say, the red here has been pretty crap, actually. I'm actually pretty disappointed. Now you do see the GE builder's plate. That's really cool. Obviously it's not legible, not what you expect. In this case, the white paint work has actually been pretty much perfect, contrary to some of my other videos. So generally speaking, I've noticed there's been a bit of an issue, as even mentioned, with the Union Pacific itself. For some strange reason, I've been having issues with the paint. On my previous ones, it was the white paint. On this, it's the actual Union Pacific writing itself. So that's really disappointing. But all the other pad printing, such as a GE Union Pacific logo, that's pretty much correct. Now, obviously, you're going to notice that the Union Pacific one has a little bit more silvering, but overall, that's fine. Look, it is a budget model. You kind of got to accept things like that. But so far, I've actually been pretty impressed. Now, let's talk about what it doesn't have. So, actually, this is a sort of good discussion. So on this one it's got LEDs, right? However, unlike perhaps something like a new Genesis model, and I will mention new Genesis model because some of the older Genesis doesn't have it still. This doesn't have any number board lighting, which is really disappointing. I really love number board lighting. And the other thing is, as you can see, lack of functioning ditch lights. Now, this is kind of why I sort of mentioned about someone who may use this as a trailing unit, because obviously the Scale Trains has a fully featured lighting suite. It's got everything, whereas this is pretty much limited to only the headlights. So that's actually a little bit disappointing. There's nothing else I could mention, but it does. So on these ones, now they have. So obviously with the newer ready to run ones, I haven't seen some of the other ones. I mainly model CP, Union Pacific, and some of the East Coast railways. Like what I mean is like before the 70s, sort of that Penn Central merger and all that. So I'm not really familiar with some of the other specific roads, but from my sort of staring at a picture and going, does that look right? It looks right to me. There's no glaringly details missing, so I'm pretty impressed there. So on the new ones, I'm gonna mention this. So on the new ones, it's got operating ditch lights, specific horns, basically everything else, sunshades and all that. So already straight ahead, pretty much ahead of a lot of other budget C44s, steerable or high A trucks. Now the reason why I mentioned this is because on most locomotives of the C44. Most of them did have the high adhesion trucks, but I believe there was a couple of railroads who didn't. Now, I can't remember which ones. But basically, yeah, I'm just going to tell you sort of the differences. You got the LED lighting, it's all bidirectional, 5-hole motor. That's really cool. Now that has been pretty much standard since it first came out, and all electric will pick up. Don't know why we have to mention that, because I mentioned in my previous video. It's pretty much standard these days. And it's also got the Athearn couplers. Personally, I think they're terrible. Right? I mean, on a budget model, I can accept them. So on this, perfectly okay. My grievances is more with the Genesis lineup. Now, this is the part I do need to mention. On the newer ones, they are fitted with a 21 pin. Now, I have the 8-pin one. So you got to be careful if you are buying these pre-owned, because functionally, if you are buying these pre-owned, you are going to notice that they can either be 8-pin or 21 pin, so you do have to keep aware of that. But overall, I'm actually pretty impressed as a package as a whole, because even things like the pilot is pretty well done, personally. So you're not going to get things such as on the back, you're not going to get anything like the MU hoses, your air hoses, your brake pipe. Yeah, so that's pretty, I personally would have preferred in the future if they do add it, but from my knowledge, I don't think they have. And there's no way to sort of verify that. But saying that, the fact that they have added ditch lights into future variations of this makes me kind of keen to maybe get another one, just because I can. So saying that, as a whole, I'm actually pretty impressed by this, because I paid 168 Australian, including DCC, on a pre-owned on eBay. Honestly, I thought that's a pretty good deal, and honestly, in some ways, I know to a lot of people these are very boring locomotives, but I have to admit, I think just the front of these have so much charisma, and just, I don't know how to describe it, they just look amazing. So overall, I'm just gonna have a quick, okay, so I've basically done a basic service, just replaced the grease that just comes out from the shop, and just gone through and made sure that it's kind of nicely lubed. I use, I know for some people it's a little bit too heavy. For me, I find it fine. It's also what I could easily get. For example, so I use the Label 102 gear lubricant, just for things like the tracks and all that, and the worm gears. Now, generally speaking, what we're going to do is just make sure and just crank it out and see what speed step 1 looks like on DCC 128 step. Now, mind you, this is with the ESU lock programmer, so things like your NT power cap are going to work a little bit better. Honestly, looking at that slow speed crawl, I gotta say that's pretty impressive. It's not the slowest I've seen, but it is pretty good. That's 3. That's 4. Also, just one thing to note, since I did do my service recently, I will say there is plenty of space to actually put a fair bit of weight over where the traction motors are. So if you're looking to maybe add a little bit more pulling power, honestly, I think there's a fair bit of space for you to add a little bit more lead weight, specifically in the both ends, just because they're not fully filled in, and unlike Proto 2000, which has a massive superstructure on top of the frame, this really doesn't. So honestly, I think there's a lot of potential here if you are willing to add a little bit more weight to it. My recommendation is either fishing sinkers, just because they're easy to get. I know lead is a pretty big one, but honestly, it's pretty hard to actually get easily. So we're going to move on to the conclusions here, and hope you enjoyed. So, in my opinion, I think this model is a pretty solid one, and in my opinion, I've got no issues buying another one. Personally, I'm actually looking at the Lombard one, and depends on if Lombard Hobbies can get my delivery within the next month. We'll see. But if everything goes well, I would be tempted to actually buy another one. I honestly, I think this is a genuinely really good locomotive for what you get. For a DCC ready one for $130, I think that is a genuinely solid model. You know, I don't have an issue recommending this, and that actually probably says a lot. Just because, you know, for all the issues with it, like the small issues with, for example, you know, the pilot and all that, lacking that MU hose detail, it's very easily fixed. You just buy a detail set. Is it a bit of a pain? Yes, but it is what it is. The other thing is, a lot of the complaints I have about it have been rectified in a newer model. The lack of a functioning ditch light is probably the biggest one. And it actually says a lot that they have actually included that. The other thing is, I would also say, you know, the fact that, you know, I haven't really touched on it in the first impressions, but generally speaking, the handrails are very, very thin. They are on par with the Walters mainline sort of standard of thinness, and honestly, that is very, very good. But yeah, the fact that it's got functioning ditch lights, fully, you know, no class, no number boards, but what can you do? And I gotta say, overall, the detail's pretty good. The Union Pacific riding thing, I'm sure it's going to disappoint a fair few people, and I'm a bit disappointed because even though I weather my models, someone may not and would probably prefer, you know, a Union Pacific that actually looks properly done. And in this case, it wasn't. You know, there are bits missing from it, and that's really disappointing. It is also bizarre because other areas of the model, you know, all the decals are pretty much perfect. So it's a little bit bizarre there. But in my honest view, I would personally buy this, you know, with my own money, and that is a solid recommendation, because if I'm willing to go out and buy another one, yeah, I'm pretty happy with it actually. You know, there's nothing I can fault about this because it's cheap, it's cheerful. I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's just good, you know. It's run smooth. I can't really fault it. I mean, look, the paint thing is one thing, but as a model itself, I'm pretty happy with it. Now I will mention about why I personally would get this over compared to something like the Kato ones. Now, on this channel, I do have a bit of a very much love-hate relationship with Kato. And the reason why I'm mentioning Kato in this one is because, guess what? Kato is going to be your closest competitor to this model. The reason why I say that is because, realistically, on the two higher end schemes, you've got the GE the Genesis ones, the Genesis 2.0, they're not cheap, and the Scale Trains ones, which aren't able to be bought, but if you do get a chance, you can pre-order them. Now, the part that I mentioned about why talking about Kato is important, because they are the only ones who make a C44-9 and an AC4400. Now, obviously, I'm not a fan of Kato on this channel for a very simple reason. For what they are, they're amazing locomotives, but secondhand, they're very, very expensive. Recently, I've double-checked on eBay again. In my part of the world, they're $275, and bluntly, right, 275 AUD, that's still $200, right? You're getting into very expensive territory, and to the point, if you are going to spend Kato money, why buy Kato? Personally, if you're going to spend that sort of money, well, why not just buy the Genesis, to be honest? And that's sort of and that's kind of the issues I've been having with Kato in general, is for how much they cost, I don't think they're worth it. Especially in today's market where you've got plenty of choice. It's no longer the early 2000s where you don't really have much choice about, who to go for. These days you've got Intermountain, Scale Train, Genesis. If you were going to pay Kato sort of money, I'd get one of those instead. So overall, I think this is a solid recommendation. It definitely gets a gold star from me. I can't fault it. I really, really can't. And I'm genuinely looking for a reason to say, no, you shouldn't buy this model, but I can't, if you are a Union Pacific or, a modern sort of modeler who wants to do all that stuff, I genuinely get this engine, Yeah, it's not as good as maybe the Scale Trains, but it's a solid one to maybe add into a trailing unit, or, a good way to start weathering. I just think this is very, very good for the money. All right. I feel like I'm becoming a bit of a Athearn fan. I feel like that's all I do on this channel, is just talk about how amazing Athearn is. Apart from the pain. I don't know why. But bluntly, I've got to say this is amazing, because it is. Now, I just want to say thank you to all my viewers, subscribers, my family, and I'd like to definitely say thank you for my partner for putting up with my very extensive model train collection. And just want to say thank you to all those people, and hopefully you had a good time watching this video, and hopefully you get to support a few of my new projects. So thank you, and good night.